Now comes a very interesting part. Once you have identified all this information, say you know that imt.edu is running a particular software, and you do a Google search and you try to find out what the loopholes are. So that was the manual way of searching, right? You manually search on Google and try to find some loopholes or vulnerabilities. So that's the manual way of security auditing. The automatic way is using ready-made tools available that allow you to perform security auditing. So security auditing is a technique of scanning the victim's computer for a list of potential security loopholes that may exist on it, using which an attacker can hack into the victim's computer. So essentially what security auditing tools do is, they scan the victim's computer, they perform information gathering, network reconnaissance, and then once they know what software, what operating system is running on the victim's computer, they have a database of all known loopholes and vulnerabilities that have been discovered ever in the history of computer security industry. So they will compare the information that they have gathered with the database of vulnerabilities that they have. And they will then tell you or prepare a report and show to you that, okay, the website address that you mentioned, this is the loophole that it has, this is the vulnerability it has, and this is the solution. So the tools that allow you to perform security auditing have been listed on the screen. You have Nessus, you have GFI LandGuard, you have Retina Scan, Saint, Core Intact, and NS Auditor. So these are all very popular security auditing tools that are available on the internet. The problem is that each of these tools is a commercial software, and each tool will cost you between $1,000 to $5,000, or maybe sometimes even more expensive than that, which is anywhere between 60,000 rupees to 2.5 lakhs per software. So it's a very expensive software. So Nessus has a free version that you can try out, but then it's not that good. So while there are these security auditing tools available on the internet, they're not free, they're pretty expensive. But they're extremely powerful. Because like I said, the way they work is that they have their own database of all the known loopholes and vulnerabilities for all software, all platforms, all operating systems. So all you need to do is, in this security auditing software, just type in the IP address or the website address of any victim. The security auditing software will automatically scan that victim and then identify security loopholes for you using that database. That is why they charge so much money. Because essentially they are doing the job of a hacker. They are doing all the scanning, they are doing all the research, and then telling you, okay, these are the loopholes and now you can hack. So once you know what the loophole is, how do you actually hack? So imagine that the victim is, say, ankitfaria.com. You do a scan and you find out that the FTP port or port 21 of ankitfaria.com is running some old version of a particular software. So what do? So you know that it is running some old version. There are two options after that. First option is you buy a security auditing software and then use that to find out, okay, we know that it is running an old version of a software on FTP port, but what are the vulnerabilities that we can use? So the security auditing tools will help you identify the vulnerabilities that you can use. If you don't want to buy these software, the other option is manually you can use Google. And you can search online databases that are free to find out, okay, IIS version 7.0, what loopholes does it have? And then one by one you can try out the loopholes. So let me actually write this down in Notepad. So how to find what software and OS is running on victim? I think Nmap or Zenmap is the answer. So once you know the name of the software and the version of the software and the operating system that is running on that remote computer, next comes how to find loopholes in a particular software or operating system. So here there are two ways. Manual technique is search on Google. Automatic technique is security auditing tools. And once you have identified what is the loophole, let's assume that there is a loophole called buffer overflow. Say it affects Windows 7 computers. So then how do you actually launch an attack? For that, you have a software called Metasploit. Metasploit. So I really want all of you to properly understand the three different questions that I've written on the screen and how they are different from each other and how to perform each one. So if you want to identify the name of the software running or the name of the operating system running on a victim, you perform information gathering using Nmap or Zenmap. Once you know that, okay, the victim is running Windows 7, for example, if you want to find out what are the loopholes on Windows 7, you can just go to Google and type Windows 7 vulnerabilities. There will be a lot of websites that will show up. There are free databases that you can then search and research and find out what the loopholes are. So that's one option. The second option is the automatic option. The automatic option is essentially you, instead of doing a Google search or doing research on your own, you can use a security auditing tool. Just type in the IP address of the victim, the security auditing tool will do the rest. Now, let's assume you've identified that, okay, victim is running Windows 7, plus on Windows 7 there's a buffer overflow that exists. So how do you actually execute the buffer overflow? So you can use the Metasploit software. And I'll discuss with you what Metasploit software is. Or the manual technique is you can write your own code. But usually most people would just use Metasploit because Metasploit comes with code already written. So once you have identified the loophole or the vulnerability, you need to write the exploit code to launch the attack. So either you can manually write the exploit code or you can use Metasploit, the software, and use the exploit code that they have already written to launch the attack. And Metasploit has the exploit code for pretty much every single loophole or vulnerability that is known. So Metasploit is one of the most powerful tools available for launching an attack. Just the way Nmap is one of the most powerful tools available for information gathering and network reconnaissance, Metasploit is one of the most powerful tools available for launching an attack. And to find loopholes in a particular victim computer, the most powerful tool is a security auditing tool. So for information gathering, use Nmap. For security auditing or to find loopholes, you need to use a security auditing tool or Google. And to launch an attack, either you need to use your own programming skills to write the exploit code, or you can use Metasploit to use the exploit code that is built into the database of Metasploit itself. So what exactly is Metasploit and why is it so useful? Metasploit is an open source framework for penetration testing that allows you to test the security of a network. It has a inbuilt large database of hundreds or rather thousands of known vulnerabilities and loopholes for various platforms, operating systems and software. It allows a user to automatically test a remote system for all the hundreds of security loopholes that are known for that particular system. So you can check the security of your network. You can try to execute exploits or the exploit code on your network or on somebody else's network. You can even deploy payloads and see what happens. It's a fantastic way to practice, research and learn hacking as well. And Metasploit is available as a free download on the internet for both Windows platforms and also Unix platforms. And Metasploit is obviously pre-installed in Backtrack. So at this point of time, I'd like to actually introduce all of you to a couple of very important concepts. One is something called an exploit, and the second is something known as a payload. So what is an exploit or exploit code? Exploit code is basically a code or some programming code, software or tool that exploits a vulnerability or misuses a vulnerability or loophole on the remote machine to cause some malicious results on it. So using information gathering, you find out the name of the software running on the victim's computer. Using security auditing, that is Google or a security auditing software, you find what are the loopholes available or what are the loopholes that exist on that particular software or operating system. And then to exploit or take advantage of that loophole and to enter the system, you need to write your exploit code, or you need to use the exploit code that comes pre-built into Metasploit. Payload. A payload is defined as the effect of executing the exploit code and some other payload code on a remote machine, which allows a medium of communication to be established between the attacker and the victim. It could be in the form of a shell prompt or some modification or deletion of the data or file access and so on. In other words, this gets a little bit difficult to understand for a beginner, but then later on in this course, there will be so many examples and live demos that I'll be giving you of exploit and payload and so on. Don't worry if you don't understand it right now. Right now, I'm just trying to introduce this topic, but I think 5 or 6 lectures later from today, you'll be able to see demonstrations of payload many times. Essentially what happens is, once you know that okay, there is a particular loophole or vulnerability on the victim's computer, you can use Metasploit to use the exploit code of Metasploit to hack into the victim's computer. Now once you've hacked into the victim's computer, how do you control the victim's computer? You need some kind of shell prompt or some kind of command line prompt where you can type some commands on your machine, which will then control the victim's computer, right? So that's what we are trying to actually do using a payload. A payload is essentially something that gives you that access to the victim's computer, or gives you that backdoor, or gives you that shell access to the victim's computer, so that after you have exploited the victim, or after you have managed to successfully hack into the victim's computer, you can control the victim's computer using the payload, or using the shell prompt, or using the backdoor entry into that particular system. So each exploit can have multiple types of payloads. Exploit is the code that misuses the vulnerability to hack into the victim's computer. Once you have hacked into the victim's computer, you need to also run some payload, because after you run some payload on the victim's computer, you will be able to control the victim's computer remotely from anywhere in the world. So that is the difference between exploit and payload. Exploit is a code that misuses or takes advantage of a vulnerability so that you're able to hack into the victim's computer. A payload is also some programming code that is executed after you have hacked into the victim's computer. It gets executed on the victim's machine so that the criminal, who can be in anywhere in the world, has some shell access or prompt access or command line access or backdoor access to the victim's computer so that you can continue to control it. So what are the different steps involved? I'd like to just quickly go through the steps again, because if you understand these steps well, then you'll be able to really do well in this course. You'll be able to actually start your journey towards becoming a good hacker. First of all, step number 1 is to identify the loophole on the victim's computer using network reconnaissance and security auditing. In fact, I like to say step 1 is find as much information about the victim using network reconnaissance and information gathering. Step 2 is using security auditing or using manual Google research. You find some vulnerabilities or loopholes on the victim's computer. Step 2 is you select and configure the exploit code and the exploit code options in Metasploit. Step 3, using Metasploit, you send the exploit code to the victim's computer and the victim's port. Step 4, so in step 3, you basically are sending the programming exploit code on the victim's computer and executing it so that you are able to take advantage of the loophole and get access to the victim's computer. Step 4, you select the payload you wish to launch along with the exploit code. And step 5, you launch the attack. That is what Metasploit is all about. Now, at this point of time, I like to try and show you Metasploit. So if all of you look at the screen, this is what Metasploit looks like. So let me just type a command called show exploits. Like I said, exploit is basically, if you notice, it says it's not been updated for a very long time because I'm running the Windows version of Metasploit right now, but I normally just use the backtrack version. I prefer backtrack for most of my hacking activities, but for the purpose of this course, I'm also showing you Metasploit on Windows. So by typing the command show exploits, I'm going to basically display all the different exploit codes that are available on this particular in this particular version of Metasploit. So if you notice, there are multiple columns. So the first column basically tells me the name of the exploit. Second column tells me the date when it was discovered. So a lot of them, some are pretty old, 94, some are more recent, 2012. There may be something even closer to that if I update this Metasploit. And then you have how dangerous this loophole is, right? So all this information is available in Metasploit. Now, if you look at the first column, not only does it show you the normal name of the particular exploit, it also shows you the technical name or the path name of that particular exploit. So you can load any of these exploit codes and then start executing them against the victim's computer. So that is what Metasploit looks like. You have Metasploit even in backtrack. So you go into exploit tools, network exploitation, I think, and then Metasploit framework. And then select MSF console. You can always update it whenever you feel like it. So we will actually not get into how to load the exploit code and how to actually execute the attack at this point of time, but later on in this course we'll definitely be discussing that. Right now I will just show you some simple things that you can do using Metasploit. I'm just trying to see what all I would like to show you today, and then we'll continue. Okay. So first thing that I like to show to you is port scanning using Metasploit. It is possible to port scan a remote computer using Metasploit. All the nmap commands are valid in Metasploit as well. Another way to do port scan using Metasploit is to simply type the following commands. So I'll give all of you a couple of minutes to write these commands down. So you type search port scan. So the search command can be used to search for any kind of module or any kind of exploit code, including the port scanning exploit code or the port scanning tool. So let me actually just do a demonstration of this. So I type search port scan. So it's now performing an entire search of the database of Metasploit. generally speaking, backtrack is much faster. So if you notice Windows, the results are still not shown up. Finally they show up. But in backtrack, they have already there on the screen. So anyway, so these are the different port scanning tools available. So you have a SYN port scanner, TCP port scanner, XMS scanner, ACK firewall scanner, and so on. So to use a particular type of command or module, you have to type the use command. So I'm going to type use auxiliary scanner port scan /TCP. So if you notice, the prompt has now changed. So let me highlight it right at the bottom. So when I loaded a particular module using the use command, the prompt changed. Now I type the command show options. So it is now showing me all the different options that I need to specify for the port scanner to work. So using the set command, I can specify the ports. So I want to port scan 1 to 100. So I type set ports 1 to 100. And if you notice, it says that the ports have been set to 1 to 100. So let me highlight it again, so that it's simpler for all of you to read what happened. So I type the use command at the top, use auxiliary /scanner /port scan /TCP. Then I type show options, and it is now showing me all the different options that I need to specify. So typically I need to specify two options. One is ports, the second is R hosts or remote hosts. So to specify an option, I use the set command. So I type set ports 1 to 100. So then it says the ports have been selected 1 to 100. Now let me type set R hosts. So I type set R hosts followed by the victim server. So now the victim server has been specified as well. And finally, I type the exploit command. So I type exploit, press enter, and now it will start performing the port scan. Actually, yeah. So if all of you look at the screen, the port scan is taking place. So we are just currently right now doing a port scan using Metasploit. So we don't even technically need any tools like Nmap or Zenmap, because you could just use Metasploit as well. So that's how you can use the auxiliary module, auxiliary /scanner /port scan /TCP module, and we just performed a port scan on IMT.edu, and it tells us that there are 4 ports open. You have port 25, port 21, port 53, and port 80 that are open. So that is how you can perform a simple port scan. So I'll just quickly type the commands down here. So show exploits is one thing that we wrote. Then we type search port scan. So that searched the entire Metasploit software for all port scanning modules. Then I type the command use auxiliary /scanner /port scan /TCP. Then I type show options. Then I type set ports 1 to 100, because that's the range of ports I want to search or scan. Then I specify the remote host, and then I type exploit. So those are the sequence of commands that I have to type if I want to port scan a remote computer using Metasploit. So that's a very simple example of how to use Metasploit. Metasploit, again, let me repeat, has hundreds of modules, hundreds of exploit codes. In this first simple example, we selected the auxiliary slash scanner slash port scan slash TCP module, and then we use that to port scan a remote computer. Similarly, we can use the TCP SYN port scanner as well. So let's quickly do that. So I'm going to type search port scan.